In this video, I'm going to explore a range of responses to the question about how Dickens presents the Cratchit family to show the struggles of the poor, which appeared in the AQA June 2017 English Literature series. If you're studying A Christmas Carol with either OCR or Edexcel, this video will still be helpful, as the questions have pretty much the same structure, where you are invited to first consider how something is presented in an extract, and then how it is presented in the novel as a whole. The exam paper, including the extract, can be downloaded from the AQA website at the following address. And I've provided a link in the description section under the video. In the AQA paper, the question is as follows. Starting with this extract, explore how Dickens uses the Cratchit family to show the struggles of the poor. Write about how Dickens presents the Cratchit family in this extract, how Dickens uses the Cratchit family to show the struggles of the poor in the novel as a whole, 30 marks. Please note that this is not an exhaustive answer, nor is it an exemplar. These are just some ideas for you to consider incorporating into your own responses by adding to what you have already covered in class. One of the potential pitfalls in answering this question, particularly the second bullet point, is that it is very tempting to try to put down everything you know about the Cratchits. This is a dangerous strategy because they do a lot more in the novel than simply represent the struggles of the poor, and I shall be producing another video that looks at all their different functions. Try to keep your answer to the second bullet focused and to put the way in which they are presented into the historical context. In this passage, Dickens presents the Cratchit family as determined to make the best of their situation and to remain cheerful, even in the face of adversity, on this one special day of the year. Bob Cratchit's exclamation at the beginning of the extract, "Oh, a wonderful pudding," and his remark that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage, leads the reader to expect something spectacular. But when it arrives, we can tell that his remarks are hyperbolic. Their Christmas celebrations appear meagre, and they do not have a lot to eat. But nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. They're depicted as a strong family unit who care about each other's feelings, and Bob Cratchit's exaggerated encouragement, along with the fact that everybody had something to say about it, communicates the love and support that they give one another. This is further highlighted by the assertion that any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. The phrase "any Cratchit" conveys the idea that the Cratchit parents have almost religiously instilled this philosophy into all of their children, to such an extent that, even if they were so inclined, they would have blushed to mention it. Their poverty is the elephant in the room. It is an obvious problem that is outside of their moral code to discuss, and it would be shameful to do so. In fact, Dickens uses the phrase "flat heresy" to describe the family's attitude towards this. The term, which is used to describe beliefs which go against religious doctrine, suggests that they would consider it an unforgivable sin to do so. Their actions, as well as their words, communicate their sense of being a strong unit. After their meal, it is implied that they all work together, as it is only after all of the chores have been done, such as clearing the cloth, sweeping the hearth, and making up the fire, that then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth. The family maintains a sense of pride and takes care of what it has. Their family display of glass is a pitiful collection. They only have 3 glasses between all 7 of them, and one of these, a custard cup without a handle, is broken. The family are not resentful, though, and they clearly value the little that they have, as these are considered to do just as well as golden goblets would have done, as Bob served the drink out with beaming looks. The juxtaposition of these two images, which draws attention to the gulf between the poorest and the richest, only serves to highlight the extent of their poverty. There is a moment of pathos at the end of the extract, when Bob Cratchit's concern for his son, Tiny Tim, becomes evident in the way in which he held his withered little hand in his. Not only does he have a disability, he is clearly weak and malnourished. The family's poverty means that they are unable to give him adequate nutrition or the medical attention that he needs. Bob Cratchit's sense of love for his child and his helplessness is clear as he dreads that he might be taken from him. The extract is a key moment in the novel, as it challenges the beliefs that Scrooge holds which govern the way in which he treats the poor. One of the literary functions of the Cratchit family is to show the way in which the poor had an uphill struggle against the stereotypes that the rich, and, by extension, the ruling classes of the day held about them. Even though, ironically, Dickens himself was guilty of creating and perpetuating some of these myths himself, such as his portrayal of the criminal underworld in Oliver Twist. Dickens uses the Cratchits to show that the poor were not an anonymous and homogeneous group, who were a scourge on society, as Scrooge believes at the beginning, but that there were those who, despite being hard-working and living a moral life, still suffered from grinding poverty. He describes them as not being a handsome family. They were not well dressed, their shoes were far from being waterproof, their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. This brief description gives us a lot of information about the Cratchits. They clearly do not have enough money to provide more than the basic necessities. We know that it is a cold winter, and yet they do not have enough money to mend their shoes or to buy warm clothes. A pawnbroker is a person who lends money at interest on the security of an article that is given to them, such as a watch, for the duration of the loan. If the deadline on the loan expires and the article hasn't been redeemed or bought back at a higher price, the pawnbroker can keep the article and sell it. The fact that Peter very likely knew the inside of a pawnbroker's communicates that even though they are in work, the amount of money they are bringing in as a family is probably not enough to buy sufficient food and fuel, let alone adequate clothing, and that they need to get loans from time to time to keep their heads above water. At the beginning of the novel, Scrooge sees Bob Cratchit as someone who is to be used and abused, with no regard for him as a person. He is described as my clerk, with 15 shillings a week, and a wife and family, talking about a merry Christmas. There is no sense of irony intended by Scrooge in this remark. He believes that Cratchit has no business having a wife and family, thus contributing to the surplus population on such a pitiful weekly wage. He genuinely has no sense that if Cratchit struggles to support a wife and family on 15 shillings a week, that it is Scrooge himself who is at fault for not paying him enough. We are led to believe from this that the poor were widely considered to be the ones to blame for their poverty, and for the fact that they struggled to make ends meet. Dickens uses the Cratchits to show that the working poor were treated inhumanely. Their job security was also precarious, as they often had the threat of instant dismissal hanging over their heads if they tried to look out or stick up for themselves. The Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 had made it much more difficult for the poor to claim relief, and so the threat of the workhouse was constant. Scrooge gives no thought to Bob Cratchit's physical comfort, as his dismal cell in the counting house is kept freezing cold. He has a fire that is so small it looked like one coal, and he is unable to replenish this because the coal box is kept in Scrooge's room. He is threatened with the sack if he so much as comes in with the shovel. He is instead reduced to trying to warm his hands at the candle, a pathetic image which highlights the extremity of the conditions. Scrooge also warns him against speaking out of turn when he says, Let me hear another sound from you, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. Someone like Bob Cratchit would know that they were one false step away from the workhouse, and this would have terrified him. The working poor, like Bob Cratchit, were seen in purely monetary terms as Scrooge moans that if I was to stop half a crown for Christmas Day off, you'd think yourself ill-used, and then alludes to the fact that paying him for a day he hasn't worked is the same as picking a man's pocket. Dickens uses Bob Cratchit's relationship with Scrooge in the first chapter to show that the poor, even if they were lucky enough to be in work, were seen as mere commodities to be exploited by their employers, and that the power really did lie in the employers' hands as to whether they were treated well or not. A further example of this is when Belinda Cratchit, who is a poor apprentice at a milliner's, is kept late on Christmas morning because she had a deal of work to finish up last night and had to clear away this morning. She goes on to tell her family of what kind of work she had to do and how many hours she worked at a stretch. The irony is clear in the sarcastic tone of Dickens' narrative voice, when Peter is wondering how he will spend the full 5 and 6pence that he may earn in the situation that Bob Cratchit has his eye on for him. Note the use of the adjective full as a means of mocking this paltry sum. The bitterness of Dickens's narrative voice escalates as he develops this idea, as Peter looks as though he were deliberating what particular investments he should favour when he came into the receipt of that bewildering income. The truth of the matter was that the extra 5 and 6pence would be swallowed up on mere survival before it was even earned. Poor families such as the Cratchits would never be able to have enough surplus income that they could save or invest for their future. Dickens juxtaposes the description of the Cratchits' Christmas dinner with the description on the journey there of the plentiful displays of produce in the shops. For the Cratchits, the goose eked out by apple sauce and mashed potatoes was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. The adjective eked out suggests that the meat was not plentiful, and that cheaper foods were needed to make the meal more substantial. Indeed, even then, for the biggest celebratory meal of the year that they have scrimped and saved to afford, it is still only deemed sufficient. It is left to the reader to wonder what type and amount of food the family were able to afford on a daily basis. In contrast, the shops seem to be overflowing with produce, such as the round, pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the street in their apoplectic opulence. This juxtaposition demonstrates what Dickens believed to be the falsity of the influential theory of population promoted by Thomas Robert Malthus, which only served to increase the troubles of the poor. The belief that there was a surplus population caused by the overbreeding of the poor, leading to insufficient food, meant that the poor were treated harshly and without compassion. They were seen as the cause of the problem, and it was deemed appropriate for them to die as a means of population control. The Cratchit situation, and that of many thousands of others, is encapsulated in the vision of the ghost of Christmas Present, who is a personification of the description given by the portly gentleman at the beginning, that Christmas is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. He is depicted surrounded by produce such as turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, which Dickens lists to enhance the sense of abundance. Lying hidden and ignored under his cloak, however, are the antithesis of all this. The allegorical figures, ignorance and want, personified as 2 children, are yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility. The use of children for this image is all the more dramatic because they are usually associated with purity, innocence, and vulnerability. People like the Cratchits are to be seen as victims and not as the cause of the problem. The ghost tells Scrooge in answer to his question, "Spirit, are they yours?" that the children are both man's, i.e., that they have been created by society and are, therefore, the responsibility of all mankind, but that he should most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom. In Dickens' opinion, the poor weren't starving because there was not enough food to go round. There was, in fact, plenty. The working poor, represented by the Cratchits, were just not able to access it because they were trapped in poverty through insufficient wages and because of limited life chances through lack of education, all of which were caused by the wilful ignorance of the ruling classes. If this did not change, Dickens' vision of the future was apocalyptic. It is only when Scrooge is made privy to what happens behind closed doors at the Cratchit residence on Christmas Day, and sees the bleak future in store for them if nothing changes, i.e. the death of Tiny Tim, that he realises the struggles of the poor are exacerbated not only by stereotyping and false beliefs caused by ignorance, but also by the unequal distribution of wealth, motivated by greed, of which he is guilty, and, more importantly, by a lack of education which keeps the population trapped in a cycle of poverty. The Cratchits allow Scrooge to see the working poor as humanised individuals, and his hard-hearted and stereotyped views are shown for what they are by the ghost of Christmas present. He has a revelation that the poor can be deserving and that they should not all be tarred with the same brush. He learns, as a representative of the wealthy and ruling classes, that he has the power to change the situation for the good. Thanks for watching. I'd really appreciate any questions or comments below. I look forward to hearing from you.